Paul, here's my mom and dad in 1929. Patent leather shoes, georgette lace, a velvet top. My dad in a pinstripe suit he borrowed with a bow tie. Handsome man, lovely ladies. And here's my dad in cowboy chaps, real six-shooters, and a cigarette everybody smoked. And look at that hat at a rakish angle. This was before the impact of the Depression hit. And Jean in 1934, oh, these photo sessions were popular with poor parents. Somehow they managed to get bonnets and starched dresses, and the photographer provided a flower and a fern. Poor but happy. And here, see that truck? My mom wanted me to hold it while she took a picture. This was at Desert Center east of LA, a spot in the road of shacks, poor people, and tarantulas. I love tarantulas. You can see how upset I got when I wasn't allowed to hold one for the picture. Being poor meant patched hand-me-downs. At 13, I made all my clothes, including this pink organdy. And here, co-workers at American Standard Radiator, where I earned $1.56 an hour and saved it to go on to college. And a couple of boyfriends, Sam Wagerman, an identical twin in his Army outfit. Nick Turner, a merchant marine. He had a maroon convertible. You have no idea what a big deal that was. And Lee Chambers, a high school star pitcher. All good guys. But I had other plans. I saved my dollars, left home, and was accepted at San Francisco State. I learned about fencing and Thoreau, psychology, Gibran. I met Lee and his dad, all of which changed my life. Here's Lee and I at a Halloween party. Lee is an artist, and me in my fencing gear. I brought a saber that time. And part of the San Francisco State curriculum was a recreation class. Here I am in upstate New York in the Catskills. And here's Lee over in Forest Knolls at the Corral, which is now a parking lot for Serenity Knolls. Here he is on Parents' Day with kids, pigs, lambs. And Jean got a job on the faculty at the College of San Mateo. Here she is with the bowling team. And here at an awards dinner with the cheerleaders. And here advising the pom-pom girls in an outfit she made out at Coyote Point in San Mateo. Shot of Jean's coaching a student. And here an example of how much the students love Jean. I had the only massage program in the state of California at a junior college. These students are giving a final, and guess who's on the table? And when Lee got drafted during the Korean War, Jean did some modeling along with teaching, and here during the Kennedy era was this incredible chartreuse gown. Look at that hairstyle. And Lee was in Monterey at the Army Language School doing illustrating for language books. When Lee got out of the service, we both decided to take a leave, and we spent 7 months in Europe. We bought a Vespa and traveled all over. Here is we were in Paris at the Bois de Boulogne. It was a wonderful trip. And here's another breakfast. How do you like that kitchen? And here's how we packed for traveling. Suitcases on the back with our tent and sleeping bags, helmets, and cookie gear in the front. And on rainy days, and we had them, we covered up everything with plastics, put on our slickers, helmets, and off we went. Here's in southern France. We spent some time there, got another tarp. It became sort of a garage, kitchen, outdoor living area. And here, outside of Democapia, Legoret, it was a dangerous place to be, and we were very, very careful. Yeah, I love this photo. There I am in the middle in the white sweater. Look at the family resemblance. I had no idea that I looked like my family back there. I got pregnant, and here's Paul in San Francisco in his crib. And Brode, our cat, decided to have her litter there. It was the safest place in the house as far as she was concerned. Paul loved Brode. And here's Paul, who he inherited a genetic problem from the Berensmeier side, and the doctor picked up on it, put Paul in casts at a very young age. Boots followed that for several years, and his feet turned out perfect. Here he is with his grandpa and Kelly out on the ridge. My dad and Paul were great friends too. Paul did love his grandparents, and Paul loved this photo of Paul discovering the sound of the sea in that seashell. Paul knew I liked my bike, and here was his trike. He was very possessive with his trike, and we took him down to Southern California. This was one of the last wild condors, and they were going to be captured for a breeding program, which turned out successfully. This is a nice shot of Paul, from a child turning into a young man. And in high school, in his early years in high school, he was pitching, and this sequence is a fun sequence. Takes me back many, many times. I attended every Little League game, every game in high school, and every decathlon Paul was ever in. A side shot. Here's our good friend Robert Korick, who became an author about edible plants, growing huge squashes and kind of having fun on the porch that one day. Back to Paul's pitching. I think this may have been a senior year, and this is what the batter saw from the pitcher's mound when Paul was a pirate. Look at that look at that hair. And when Paul graduated from Drake High School, we took 2 shots, the traditional one and then one with a squash blossom necklace. Grandpa loved that. He called Paul Prince Val. And then Paul wanted to try track and field. And at College of Marin, he discovered he had speed, he had agility. So you see him in the dash and the hurdles here. And more discoveries. Paul took several solos. This was a major solo that Paul took. He came back happy, content, with a lot of stories to tell. And Paul, as a young man at San Francisco State, when he was doing the decathlon, and he won the Northern California Conference that one year. Well, Paul, here's Lee on top of the Tumbleweeds Forest Farm travel camp that we did with Harold Gregg. Here's a chuck wagon when we were on back in the Southwest. The chuck wagon was one of the pickups. But we didn't want to raise Paul in San Francisco. We naturally came out to San Geronimo Valley. 10 years of hiking. Eventually we had a garden in the late 60s, a wonderful garden, and you could hardly recognize Jean. This is no longer the Kennedy look with a chartreuse gown, but a tie-dye shirt and jeans, long hair, and then her favorite bike, ready to go on one of her trips to Mendocino on a solo. In the late 70s, Jean ran for the water board during the drought year. Paul wore that shirt in the Dipsy. And here's my supporters. Look at that hair. They're not hippies, but they look like it. And Jean, when she was out getting votes, stopped by Nicasio Lake with her bike. One of the parties with Grandpa up in our gallery, singing joyfully. It was a happy birthday party. And in 1981, we got money from HUD, San Francisco Foundation, the County of Marin, to upgrade the community center, from art center to community center. And here's Grandpa with his Findhorn garden. He was in good shape. White hair, white beard, the Valley's Santa Claus. And this reunion, family reunion, we were singing Slav songs. There I am next to my dad, his oldest brother, one of the twins. What a reunion. And canoeing. We love to canoe. Look at those worn paddles. Off on another adventure. The canoe was longer than the little bug. Oh, we had beehives. And the monthly ritual of hair cutting. I cut my dad's hair. I cut Lee's hair from the time we married, and I always cut Paul. And Paul discovered these Moki steps in Canyon de Chelly, and I decided to climb them. What a thrill. And in Havasu Canyon, this Indian lady came up to me, put her baby on my back. I got on the horse, and we rode down into the canyon. Oh, here's some friends we picked up along the way. And Gary Giacomini, in his 4th term, he wanted some posters again. And there they are, Paul and his dad, Paul with his Spirit Rock shirt on. And here with Lee's relatives, we showed them the sweat lodge that Paul and I helped build in the late 70s. Look at that decathlon build. Paul doesn't look like that today. That was at the Roundhouse at Cooley Lochlow. And all that white stuff is snow. A major snowstorm that came down to our level. And on one of our trips, while Lee's out there looking for petroglyphs, I'm looking for mortars and pointing at a pistol I found. And that pistol fit the mortar perfectly. I was so excited at that discovery. And here, this picture I discovered was on the front page of the Pacific Sun when I was president of the Marin Conservation League for 3 years in the early 90s. Paul and I at Russian Gulch, one of our northern coastal trips. And many of you may recognize this rock circle in Forest Knolls, a magical spirit rock circle. And a couple of favorite family photos. Here one Christmas at a friend's house. Paul loved running, and he loved the speed of the cheetah. Again with his favorite t-shirt on, Spirit Rock shirt. And there you see the cheetah and my beloved family. And we moved from cheetah to salmon. Paul with his mustache, and there we are at the school at the Salmon Bridge. I wanted to include for Paul a picture of my mom and dad and their dog Rusty. And then this family picture, there's Fred with his daughter and her son, his grandson, and his son Lee, and our son Paul. I love this shot, Lee with a gun, a rifle, that he shot a duck right in the eye from many yards away. It was an amazing shot. And here he is fishing. Lee was quite a sportsman. And I took this picture, and when Lee and I took a photography class at San Francisco State, and I loved that shot of him. Here's a favorite. Here's Paul with his dad when we came back from a tumbleweeds trip at Forest Farm. And here's another one. This one is with Lee and his dad. Look at that family resemblance. This was taken by Harlan Floyd in the early days of the art festival at the Art Center. And Lee, one day on a printmaking session, pencil behind ear, and then this photo of us together, I made that shirt for him specially for his birthday. And then a few mentors. In this case, there's Willis Evans off at the right. We did many trips up the creek in the San Geronimo Valley with Willis. And we loved Phil Arnott, adventurer, writer, photographer. We learned a great deal from him. Oh, and I loved Kate Wolf. Didn't know she was a folk singer. Our connection was Indians. She bought me this blanket as a surprise. Quite a fun person. She made me laugh a lot. Here's Kate at a serious moment. She invited me from the college during Easter vacation to go on a tour back east with her. I did. I was a gopher, and I sold records like crazy for Kate. Nice shot here, Paul, for you. Here's your dad in a ribbon shirt, your grandpa, my dad, and that's Kiowa that Lee had many pictures of, drawings of for his class. Here are you with your dad with Bearheart, a great healer from New Mexico that stayed with us. J.C. Eaglesmith. We did many sweats with J.C. Eaglesmith. We even went back to North Carolina, the whole family, to help him with the Blue Eagle Foundation to build some sweats there in a dance house. Now, many people wouldn't recognize this. This is Tamarancho, right here in Whites Hill. We had sweats there for 10 years, weekly. And Paul and I, the Wilderness Way program, building a Thule reed boat. And here we took it to Heart's Desire Beach on Tamales Bay and tested it. And then the next picture shows Paul with children paddling it from the beach over to not Cooley, but to the little Indian village on the beach at Heart's Desire, near Heart's Desire. And two tired people at a very successful event. And here's Paul playing his Native American cedar flute with a shirt that he inherited from his dad. Looking at Flanders Ranch, eventually looking at Spirit Rock, and I could just feel the city just drain off my back, and I was home. And it never, ever changed. And I've heard others describe that. Maybe not the exact words, but the exact feeling, over and over again.
Exactly so.
And so it's our little magical place of home.
Yeah. You've been able to go beyond that. I mean, most of us who come here, those of us who come here with children have a natural community.
Yes.
Those of us who do not, like Jenny and me, do not.
Yes.
And yet you have built in this area a sense of community that goes far beyond beyond any suburban community, where most of the community is the property association, which is usually repressive. And, and that sort of thing. But you have built a sense of community that exceeds us. And this is remarkable in this country. I was born in a small town just before the Depression and raised. There was a strong sense of community there in Minnesota. But I've never encountered it since. And especially in California. And what is remarkable about this is that you've done all of these things on very much a self-motivated basis, and you've had enormous energy which you put into these projects that most people just simply wouldn't have or do. Mm-hmm. And you've asked for very little in return. In fact, you've really asked for nothing in return, which is also remarkable. And it's one of your great strengths, and it's one of the things that leaves you free. And your freedom to do these things is absolutely essential to what you want to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting, because I don't know if I ever mentioned to you, but Gary Giacomini, when he was going to be the supervisor, mm-hmm. and was leaving his post as a board member here, there was a meeting in his house about who the next board member might be. And Gary said, "Gene," he said, "you're hands down the person I'd like to see. Mm-hmm. And with what you've done, it'd be very easy for you to be elected." Mm-hmm. And he said, and he said it in a way that he didn't think I would possibly object. And I let him finish. And I said, "Gary," I said, "no," I said, I am at a time in my life, I don't want to be on the board." And he said, "Why?" He says, "You have a lot of influence." I said, "No." I said, each person there is only one of 5, and I am one of 1. I said, "I need to do it on my terms." Mm-hmm. And I said, "I don't know how to compromise with some people, mm-hmm. and I could never remember if somebody scratched my back when I'm supposed to scratch theirs, mm-hmm. or even if I want to."
Yeah, exactly.
I said, I can't put that into my life, yeah. So I have to be one of 1. Mm-hmm. And he just looked at me, he never said anything, and we went on to getting someone who would do a good job, mm-hmm. In that important position. Mm-hmm. But it just came out very clearly that, I don't know, maybe that was ego, I'm not sure. I just knew I had something that I didn't want constrained.
Yes.
And modified, because I have a great respect for other people, and I was afraid I might back down because of the situation with other 4s. they were the majority and now I'm holding. I didn't want that to even be a part of any consideration. I had to do the right thing. And I felt I knew what that was, deep down. And I would know what to do when the time came. And I think that's true.
There are citizen groups that are led by people who rise and fall, but you have led the fight to maintain this valley as it was, or as nearly as it was as one could make it, preserve it, and you haven't faltered all these years. And one of the things that interests me so much in this process is, one, what spirit, what passion you had in pursuing this. And the second was how you managed not to be caught. Because
I have to tell you the story of Rubier.
Political bodies are elites. They represent elites, and the staffs who serve them represent them because the staffs are dependent upon them for the budget. So no matter what a particular planner's ethos or his views are, they ultimately are subordinate to the views of the director of the department, the planning commission, which is appointed by, in Marin's case, the board of supervisors, and ultimately the board of supervisors. So no planner is really free. They're all bound. So here is a person who is out of the ordinary, part of the ordinary, out of the ordinary, influencing in a major way the non-development of this wonderful valley.
Okay.
That's how I would approach it.
Well, that's great. We'll explore this.
Okay. My name is Pete Grote, and I've been a Valley resident for 28 years this year. Came to this valley in 1978 on the whim of my wife, looking for a place to live. And she was immediately enchanted, and I said, you know, it's a long way to commute. But her vote was decisive, and I never regretted it. And we've lived in this valley now for 28 years, and we've appreciated the state in which it has remained. And my background is as a planner of sorts. My primary work was in economics, data, and statistics in the Department of City Planning in San Francisco. So I can't lay claims to planning anything. Neither can I be blamed for it. One of the things that attracted us to the valley, even in the 50s, was how wonderfully near a suburban development like Manor it was, and yet how remote it was. It was like, coming over the hill was like Passage from Lost Horizons, that wonderful novel and movie of the 1930s, in which, after coming over the snow-covered pass, they enter Shangri-La, and this paradise. Outside of Shangri-La, over the pass, is the world where people wither and people succumb to mortality. Inside Shangri-La is perfection and paradise. And when I came over after commuting from the city and came over the hill and spotted the Holsteins grazing on Flanders Ranch, I knew I was back in Shangri-La. And we, for years, have been acquainted with Gene. And Gene's work in preserving this valley is what makes it an honor and pleasure to interview her. Because through her efforts, major development in this valley has not occurred. The valley has retained a sense of what the valley was even before the roads, even before the railroads came through. It has retained the community of the flavor of the 5 hamlets in the valley, which are each distinct and unique. And more importantly, she has developed a sense of community, which is rare. And one of the things that I found most important to talk about to her was how she managed to do this over the years, how she he's managed as a single person to mobilize so much effort that's resulted in benefit to the community and in the preservation of the valley, as a single person operating outside of the organization of bureaucracy and politics that characterizes the standard structure of government. My own experience is, as a planner in working, or bureaucrat working in the planning department, is that planning departments are part of the elite organization. That's how they were conceived in the 19th and 20th centuries, and citizen input is limited to people who were appointed by mayors or boards of supervisors to serve on commissions, which immediately makes them not necessarily representative of the community as a whole. It's only in the late 60s and 70s that citizen participation on an adversarial and advocate basis becomes part of the planning process, and that's not true in every place. It's certainly true in San Francisco. But before that time, Gene was the person who sparked what amounts to a very civil disobedience, a contest of wills between the bureaucracy and a person who understood the nature and essence of what she wanted to protect and preserve. And I give you Gene Berensmeier.
Thank you very much, Pete. I was listening carefully, and I just admire how Pete, with his background and his sensitivity, is expressing how it was to work in a bureaucracy, seeing the politics of the day and the environmental movement that occurred and affected Marin County, and seeing the overview of that, and then seeing the impact on him and his lovely wife Jenny and their life here in the San Geronimo Valley, and watching people like me and others and what we do to preserve our community. I just have learned so much from Pete over the years. He has that wonderful overarching sense of what it's all about and able to convey it verbally so clearly and so distinctly. Yes, I'm Gene Berensmeier, and I discovered the San Geronimo Valley through my husband Lee. We were in a liberal arts program that required every student at college to take certain classes. One was a recreation class, and we both decided to be counselors. Lee became a horse wrangler here at Forest Farm Summer Camp in 1952, and I went to upstate New York in the Catskills and represented California in a camp called Camp Manitou for Puerto Rican children. It was a wonderful experience, but Lee wrote nothing but wonderful postcards about the beautiful San Geronimo Valley, and he and I both taught as counselors in 1953, and married a few years later, and in the early 60s decided where we lived in San Francisco was not the place we wanted to raise our son, because my background is a native California, born in Livermore, but raised during the Depression years in Nevada by my grandparents. Decided we wanted our son to be raised in a beautiful environment. And we found Lagunitas, a spot in Lagunitas in the early 60s and have been there ever since. I'm a retired professor of physical education and taught bicycle camping, weight training, first school of massage in the state of California, in a public school. I was on cutting edge stuff in the 60s and 70s, loved what I was doing. But evenings, weekends, summers were all over this valley, trails and open space. And I'll tell you more about some of those details. Turn it back over to Pete.
Well, one of the things that interests me is the prospect of the valley that the planners had when Gene came on the scene. Now, planners are notoriously affected by the dogmas they learn in school, and they carry those into their practice. And usually it's rarely contested because they are the people with the lawyers behind their names, they are the professionals, They know what's best for you. The planning commissioners are, as I said, selected politically. The planning department is subject to budget passage, subject to the mayor and the board of supervisors for their money. So planners are, in a sense, in a tight circle. While they may have certain ideals that they want to satisfy, those ideals have to satisfy the political climate at the time. And that imposes some really severe restrictions. So the unusual thing, particularly as early as the 60s and 70s, is to find a community group or a leader or a person who's outside that political organization who doesn't necessarily have a community group backing them, who is able to effect change or no change. And this is what I perceive Jean doing. And I would like to know more about how she went about doing this.
It started, innocently enough, my involvement in essentially environmental politics in 1972, August 1972. I remember distinctly, for years, since we moved here in the early 60s, every day we'd have our circle hike with family on a trail or going up to the ridge. And I just expected the valley to remain the way we experienced it. One day, on a Friday, I walked down the driveway to empty the garbage, ordinary action, and there were two men at the water heater, and they were doing some digging around, and I tend to be a curious kind of person, and I walked over, said hello, and we exchanged a few pleasant words, and I said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "Oh, we're replacing this pipe." I looked over their shoulders and looked down, and I saw that there was a pipe badly corroded. They were pulling that section out, and they had pipes nearby that were larger. And I said, "But you're not replacing it with the same pipe." I said, "That's a larger pipe." And I was wondering about that. And they said, "Oh, why, of course," he said, "this whole valley is going to be covered with houses." And I had never heard of that. And the vision of houses as a roller coaster of homes on the ridges and on the slopes, it was a shock. So I said, how could I find out more about this? They mentioned a man by the name of Stroh. He was the director, or manager, I guess, of MMWD. I found out about him. I called him up. He was wonderful. I told him what my problem was, and I was concerned, how could I find out more information? And he said, "Well, we can give you some maps, but you should talk to Werner von Dingdell. There's some activities being proposed at county board level, and you can get some information from him." I called Werner von Dingdell. I began to find out what kind of a community I lived in, this unincorporated area. Bud Barr was the supervisor. I called Bud Barr, the supervisor. He wanted to know immediately if I belonged to the church. And I didn't know what that had to do with anything, but I told him I did not belong to the church. He became very stiff over the phone. And so I said, "Well, forget the supervisor. Concentrate on Stroh and concentrate on Werner von Dingdell." When I got the information I wanted, and Werner told me where I could see a copy of what he referred to as a 61 master plan, what was intended for this valley, and invited me to come in. I did that. I went in, I looked at the map, I got a copy of it, and then I invited him, and I invited Stroh to come onto our community, to the multipurpose room. And I typed up a little sheet of paper that I posted at each of the post offices, inviting people to come to this meeting to see the 1961 master plan and talk to MMWD and the planning department about what it meant for this valley. And I have that map here that I'd like to show Paul, and because it was stunning to me. And after that meeting, a small coterie of people decided we would meet together. We would become an ad hoc group. And we called ourselves the San Geronimo Valley Ad Hoc Planning Group. And we met in a room here in the community center here, which we called it the Art Center at the time. Gary Giacomini was there, running for supervisor. We sat on the floor and we formulated ourselves as a group to fight the 61 master plan and create a plan that really reflected what we had and to see if we could preserve that. What we've just posted here is a map, the San Geronimo Valley Master Plan of 1961. And this is the map that Werner von Gandel showed me and gave me a copy of that we presented to the community. It's a stunning map. What I'd like first is to orient you so you know what you're looking at on this master plan, and then tell you what it was intended to be. This is the outer boundary line of the San Geronimo Valley planning area. Over here is Fairfax, coming over White's Hill. You come down, this would be Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, going through the valley until you get to the Inkwells, which is in this area. This is Nicasio Valley Road going up and into Nicasio Valley. You can see Kent Lake here. This line here is the ridge line that we now call San Geronimo, or rather, it's San Geronimo Ridge, but is part of the Gary Giacomini Open Space Preserve. Over here is Barnaby Lookout Tower, and of course, Barnaby Ridge coming to Nicasio. Over here is Loma Alta, and then this ridge above now Spirit Rock that goes over to Nicasio Valley Road. So that gives you an orientation. Now, what was planned in 1961 was a major freeway to serve this valley. And that freeway came over, major arterial, came over White's Hill, down across where Flanders Ranch is, cut across the slopes of this ridge, and across Roy's Redwood, right above Roy's Redwoods, and then into Nicasio Valley. That was a major arterial. Feeding off it, and here's the exchange. That exchange is just about where Flanders' driveway goes in to his ranch. Flanders' ranch was condemned for an area that was to be a high school. I just recently got a map that shows that area and the parking that was designed. I didn't know where the parking was, but all that parking was meant here for this high school. Let's talk about schools for a moment. There was to be a school here near the Woodacre Improvement Club. There was a school way over the northern ridge above the lake in the Tamalpais watershed. There was a school high above Forest Knolls, two schools in San Geronimo area, and another one in Lagunitas. You know what we're talking about? We're talking about 20,000 people. And I believe the plan was similar to Nicasio, and very few people know this, that those lots that I will point out to you could be subdivided, which meant doubling that population. Now, my fingers here are along the ridgeline. Those were 20,000 square foot homes. As I said before, a roller coaster of homes. That's the highest point, the closest connection we have with the cosmos would be these houses, destroying really the sense of those open ridges or the wooded ridges that we have. The whole area around Kent Lake were estate-type homes. You can see the larger density here, which were these were 2-acre lots. Our village, the concept of village is totally gone. Woodacre Valley, very, very dense. These are 10,000 square foot lots around the school, and this is the valley, Woodacre Valley. So when you look at this, it's stunning. This right here is a heliport. This was a community, kind of a mall-type center. And in those days, see these dots on the green? That's that whole section around what we call Spirit Rock. That was multifamily residential. Can you imagine? And beautiful, the little more, what we call Maurice Thorner Ridge, which we preserved above the school, that was covered with homes. Covered with homes. Now, the one thing we do have that was built at the time is a golf course. The golf course comes around, we call the back nine here, and then it's on Sir Francis Drake in this area, and right there is the golf course, the main buildings. So we still have the golf course, but we managed to change what the master plan for the valley was. After looking at this in 1972, meeting for 5 years, we came up with the first San Geronimo Valley Community Plan. And that essentially did a couple of things. One, it preserved the rural character of our community. And it did that by saying the village boundary for Woodacre is X. The village boundary for San Geronimo is X. Same for Forest Knolls and same for Lagunitas. And outside that village boundary, we wanted to have a much lower density. We worked on the zoning. We weren't completely successful. I wanted 40 and 60 acre zoning like they had in Nicasio, but there were lawsuits happening at that time. And Gary talked to me about that. He said, we won't be able to get a 40 acre zoning for a wooded area. You can't claim that as agriculture. So I looked at the politics of that, and I said, well, what can we settle for? He said, 20 acre zoning, we can settle for. I said, fine. And the homeowners association battled. We did go head to head with the homeowners. They wanted 10 acre zoning. We got 20 acre zoning, and it's fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. Outside of the villages is all 20 acre zoning. But one other major thing happened. This is the ridge line, San Geronimo Valley Ridge, here. This area, after we finished our plan, Rich Boylan, one of the key members of our committee that developed the new plan, was elected to the water board, and MMWD purchased this area. And that's part of the MMWD watershed, which is wonderful because it's almost, as some of you know, it's a wilderness that is around Kent Lake and on the slopes of Mount Tam. So now the San Geronimo Valley planning area is everything above my arm here. From the ridge, the watershed slopes down to the main stem, San Geronimo Creek, and slopes down from Loma Alta and from Barnaby. So this is the San Geronimo Valley area. We have right now around 4,000 people in the valley. We are a far cry from what was proposed in this plan. And our community plan was updated. I chaired that committee in 1997 to update the plan. And the updated plan pays much more attention to our coho salmon and plants and wildlife. Our first plan had certain limitations, but even the planning department didn't know what they were doing, and we did our best, and it was a great first plan, but we've got even a better one now. So that's that.
Let me make a few comments on this as someone who doesn't profess to be a planner, as I mentioned before, I'm an analyst, but who went through planning school. This is a standard neighborhood unit plan. This was the dogma of planning schools. You had a self-contained neighborhood except for employment. All of these people had to commute out of the area for employment. There's no employment for them here. This is a veteran community. The only employment we offer in the mall were the services like teaching. This is an absurd plan. This is like Levittown West. It's as though this was a flat plain, taking no cognizance of topography. The infrastructure for this would have been prohibited, given the fact that natural gas lines have never come over the hill because it's not feasible. PG&E knows very well that it's not feasible to lay all of the lines that would have to lay here. This is nonsense. This is planning school nonsense, and it's the sort of thing that causes one to really draw back from planning as an ideology. In San Francisco now, the ideology is the outdated Congrès International Architecture Moderne of Corbusier, which dated back to 1938, where everything has to be vertical towers. The worst aspect of it, let me tell you a little story. Telesis was a group founded by Jack Kent and others in the 1940s, and it espoused progressive concepts of planning. It would have taken most of the western addition from roughly near the Civic Center to west and converted it to a park per se. It would have wiped out all the low-density dwellings and created towers with greenway around them. Now, all you have to, if you want to look at failure, all you have to do is go to Park Merced, and you see a sterile area of high-rises with apartments and an empty green sward around them. They're both objectionable, both the concentration in skyscrapers for housing and the kind of densities this would propose. This is what makes you really suspect certain schools of planning. And this had to do more with physical planning than with sociological or other economic forms of planning. But it's really an artifact of a period that now, thank God, is for the most part gone. Except, unfortunately, in undeveloped flat areas throughout the rest of California. This is what's happening in Modesto, this is what's happening over the hills of Livermore, this is what's happening up in Santa Rosa, and it's a mess.
Well, I really appreciate that insight. I would say when we accomplished that, creating that first community plan in 1977, I was naive enough to believe that by doing that, the county planners would be our advocates, would understand our feeling about preserving the environment when it came to development and open space. And I got, being on their mailing list, I began to receive things from the county that made it very clear to me they were not our advocates. That there are people, developers, who simply go in, they ask for a variance here, they ask for what usually was a variance, and it was not in keeping with the spirit of this plan. At the same time, Gary, who was impressed with the work of our committee, asked me if I would serve on the County Parks and Open Space Commission. I checked out what they did, and basically, their job was to implement the 1972 Bond Act, which was to preserve the uplands and greenbelts in the eastern urbanized corridor. Now you have to understand that when this plan was being developed, the county was working on a unique plan, it was unique nationwide, that divided the county into three sections: the eastern urbanized corridor, the rural corridor, where we live, including Nicasio, and the recreational corridor, which was Point Reyes areas, recreation areas, and ranches. 90% of Marin County residents reside in the eastern urbanized corridor. That's our boundary, Woods Hill and Fairfax. The other 10% live on the majority of land in the rural corridor and in the recreational corridor. I went to Gary and said, Gary, I've read the document for the Bond Act. All open space is intended, the 28,000 acres to be purchased are in the eastern urbanized corridor. I said, that's fine. I said, I noticed on their priority list, they included one possibility, Roy's Redwoods, Bates Canyon, way down in 24, 26 priority. I said, if I get on the commission, if I accept this, I want you to know that I will try to get Roy's Redwoods preserved. It's a unique area. It is a very spiritual place. It needs attention as far as thistles are concerned, but it is a very special place, and I used to sneak on that property with my son many times in the 10 years I lived here, or first 10 years I lived here. I said, what do you think? He said, if you can get it, I'll support it. I was appointed, and within 3 months I invited the commission for a picnic out in Roy's Redwoods. Within the next 2 months, Roy's Redwoods went to the top of the list, and they designated monies for its purchase. It's 317 acres. I talked to Dave Hansen, at the time the open space planner, and said, Dave, I said, how do we go about this? He said, well, I'll meet with the owner and see what we can get. He said, what do you want? I said, we've got to get the meadow, and we've got to get the fringe of redwoods around the meadow. That's absolutely essential. We looked at that, and it looked like it might be about 40 acres. I couldn't stay home. When he was negotiating, I was walking up and down the aisle in the Marin Civic Center. I'll never forget. Praying, maybe, I'm not sure. But my thoughts were on that negotiating team. Dave came out, hanging the face. Gene, I didn't get the 40 acres. I said, oh, what did we have to settle for, Dave? He said, would you settle for the whole 317 acres? I was ecstatic. I just was ecstatic. We got the whole thing, which included not only the Roy's Redwood, which is the headwaters for Larson Creek, where the coho salmon come up. That's another story. And we got not only the headwaters, but we got the meadow, and we got the ridge, and it was a delight. The first open space in the San Geronimo Valley, and within that year, it became the most popular open space in Marin County, to the extent we did something we never wanted to do. We had to put porta potties out there because people were lacing toilet paper in the trees, and we didn't want porta potties in any of our open spaces. Roy's Redwoods was too popular. So that's a story I love, and of the things that I feel in terms of effort and accomplishment, it was one of the easiest things to do. I was in the right place at the right time with the right people, and a little wine and cheese on a picnic did it. So I love that story.
That indicates your practical approach to things. It's very pragmatic. Now this really segues away from the master plan and into building a sense of community. It's quite apparent in the United States that suburban communities, such as those outlined in the so-called neighborhood unit idea, have failed to create a real sense of community outside of school associations. There is no sense of community. What you have been able to do in the San Geronimo Valley, not only to preserve the valley in the nearly pristine state, but also to develop a sense of community through work with the community center, your work with art, your work with the welfare outreach programs, your integration of these things with the school. This to me is a remarkable achievement. I mean, it would have been enough if you preserved the valley. That would have been enough for anyone. But to create a sense of community beyond that is a remarkable achievement in my eyes.
That's nice to hear that. It's appreciated because in terms of the environment, I wanted families and children to be able to walk on trails and go to open space right outside their back door and walk along the creeks with their families and their children, just the way I did with Paul, and my husband and I did with Paul. That it seemed very important to be a part of where you lived, to be responsible for it, to steward it, and to enjoy it on many, many levels. And that sense of community, I'm very sensitive to that too. And when my son was ready to go to kindergarten, I decided I'm going to be a PTA mom. I'm going to meet all these other mothers with children. We're going to bond, and we'll do these wonderful things. So I said, the first thing I have to do is go to a board meeting. So before Paul went to school that fall, I attended a board meeting in this room. And sat in the back, and I'm listening and looking at the agenda. All of a sudden, I'm hearing somebody say, well, we've got the money now from the state, and we're going to build this San Geronimo campus. It's really unusual, round, and no walls, and they described it. They were so excited about it. And in exchange for the money that they're going to get, they're going to condemn this building and destroy it, and turn it into a parking lot. And I sat there, and I heard this lady say, I'll lay down in front of a bulldozer before I let you destroy this beautiful building with that beautiful mural. And that woman that was speaking was me. And I didn't realize it. It was as if I stepped out of myself for a moment. Can you imagine destroying this building? Look at it today. It is community. It has evolved. It's a living organism. When we started it, it was condemned. Yes. My dad's in construction. I helped my dad on construction projects in days when you had to solder, and I got a lot of burns before the days of Romex in helping my dad on some of the construction jobs. I said, Daddy, this building is condemned. They say it's got cracks in it. I'd like your opinion. Daddy came over. We climbed under this building, saw the heartwood beams underneath my dad raved about. He looked at the cracks. He said, let's just laugh. He said, this building is going to stand long before any other building. So, with Daddy's advice, and we said, well, be careful with the ceiling. There could be problems with the ceiling. So, my dad's a very smart man. And I said, okay, Daddy, thank you very much. And I went to the board and I said, I would like to rent that building as an art center. We ignored this California directive that it's supposed to be demolished. And they knew I was going to make a great effort not to demolish it. But on the short term, I said, I'd love to have an art center. Well, it was an interesting timing. It was 1968, that was the summer of love. I happened to have long hair, a certain amount of native features, and the rednecks in the community came out of the caves, were going after the hippies, focused on the center. And I was going to be teaching children how to smoke marijuana and so on. I ignored those things, and we got on with business here. We had over half of the student body in classes. Macrame, naturally, in those days. Leatherwork, naturally, in those days. Jewelry. Jack Dorrit came down with his bagpipes. We had mechanic classes. It was a wonderful time, and the building was falling apart. We didn't care. All we needed was insurance, which we got at the art festival. We had 100 people at the first art festival, and we had enough money to cover the insurance. At the end of that year, the parents wanted me to continue, and I said no. I said, if this is really going to be what it needs to be, it's got to belong to the people. So we had an attorney friend there that we discovered, and he created a nonprofit, and I didn't know what that was, and we all learned about how you create a nonprofit and what the responsibilities were. And for a few years we stumbled, but after 1990 we hired Dave Court, and look at what we've got today. The services we provide the community, our connection with services with the school are absolutely astounding. And my favorite thing right now is sitting here and reflecting on the environmental art show we had just recently, a few days ago on Sunday, that reflects what artists feel about living in the community. Artists who've lived here for decades, whose livelihood is their artwork. And that artwork in these two rooms are inspired by the environment in which they live, the San Geronimo Valley. I couldn't be more happy that I have a part, and my friends have a part in preserving that, so that we can all enjoy this rich artwork, and also the musicians and the poets that also are inspired by the environment we have conserved. So the getting on the commission, Roy's Redwoods, other open space, and this building are just a thrill to me, Pete.
Wonderful.
Just a thrill.
Wonderful. We have covered a lot of Jane's work. The fruit of that work you see around you. It is a valley preserved from the greed of development, from the idiocy of planners. It is a nearly pristine environment that wouldn't exist if it weren't for this person that I'm talking to. But as we recently saw in the case of Hendricks Horn development And in the case of French Ranch, battle is never over. And I'd like Jean to say a few words about those proposed developments, one that did occur, one that did not, and her wisdom on how we can continue to preserve what we have, to keep this valley as a monument to nature, and to minimize the destruction proposed by the Municipal Water District on the ridge and by the greed of developers and the short-sightedness of politicians and planners.
Constant vigilance is required in stewardship. We have people out there who are so greedy, their tactics are unethical. My own sense is to consistently monitor whatever comes from the planning department, keeping my ears open to possibilities that are being discussed at many levels. And I try to confine that concern to the valley. There are other areas in Marin County I also care about, but it's the valley that I have to pay strictest attention to. One of the most intriguing things that happened here was when the the Hendricks and Horn development was proposed. That was a major issue with me to monitor because that 1,600 acres wrapped around every village on the southern side of the San Geronimo Valley, from White's Hill all the way to Taylor Park. People who lived in those villages go out their back door and were confronted with gates, no trespassing gates. They couldn't go on that open space, and that was purchased by Hendricks and Horn for a development. When I first got the details of the development that was proposed, I was shocked to learn that Lagunitas Development Company sold Hendricks and Horn not only the acreage, but these tiny little undevelopable parcels all along the outer boundary roads of Woodacre. Those little parcels were thrown in the zoning of that section, so that rather than dealing with 80 max homes behind those 4 villages, it was like 160 homes. I talked to people I knew in the planning department and the commission, but I couldn't get anywhere with getting those deleted. It was either illegal, I don't remember. All I can remember right now is that they were in the pot and we had to deal with it. The plan was developed. Friends of the Valley worked with it, tried to put them in the right locations and so on. I was a part of that process, never happy deep inside, because that deserved to be protected as open space where we could. And we were ending up with what we got, 4 phases of development. Bates Canyon was lost to a large degree in the first phase of development. That was intended to be a park, a county park in 1944, and it was lost to the first phase of development. That left the other 3 phases of development. One day, when that was being developed, Supervisor Rumier came to me and said that Hendricks and Horn were having financial troubles with one of their developments in San Rafael area, and he offered me $10,000 if I would help him with people in the community supporting the county purchasing the remaining 3 areas, development areas. And I told him that, I thanked him, and I said, thank you. I said, it's very important that we get this as open space. I will do whatever I can to help in that regard, but I can't accept any money for that. I have to give my full passion to it as an individual and a protector of our environment, and not as a job that I paid for. And that was fine. And then I told him that he asked me about the Homeowners Association, and I said, I'm not that popular with the Homeowners Association. But here's the person you call, don't mention my name, and you will get their support. I'm convinced of that. He did that, he got their support, and then it took a little time, and we got it. We got 1,300 acres added to the 89 above Bates Canyon and the 280 in Lagunitas, so that all of the area behind the 4 villages on the southern side, clear up to the top of the ridge, is public open space. I think that is wonderful. Vulnerable indeed, and we would have lost it had it not been for the greed of the developers and having people in the right place at the right time. So the story of French Ranch isn't the same. I can remember Gary saying with Doug Maloney at a big meeting, there will never be more than 4 to 6 houses in French Ranch, the heart of the valley. And that didn't happen for a lot of reasons. It was vulnerable, we lost it, and not only did we get the maximum house, but because the state had a mandate that if the developer would allow low-income housing for their requirement, they could get an additional 7 houses. We have over 30 houses there. It's criminal. It should never have happened. The heart of the valley should have been protected, but we learned a lesson there. And there's still development that will occur. 200 acres in Forest Knolls, Flanders, hopefully we can preserve it. We still need to monitor. We still need to be watchful, be very vigilant, and I ask everyone to help in doing that.
Gene, it's been such a pleasure, and I've learned a great deal about you and about the valley in the course of this conversation, and I thank you very much for participating.
Thank you, Paula. I really did enjoy your inviting Pete to do that interview. I've always admired him and his wife Jenny and her beautiful artwork. And she was a great dancer also in San Francisco years ago. And he has such a broad perspective in his background. I really learned a lot just listening to him. So I want to thank you for that.
Yeah, I was behind the video and was really impressed too, but one thing came up for me, and I felt it kind of deep inside. I don't know a lot of politics, as you know, but growing up with you, you told me so many stories. And I got to thinking, that Pete sees Jean as how she is now, but what really made Jean who she is? And 3 stories, I was surprised, 3 stories popped up into my mind that you told me when I was little. And I think I'd like you to tell those 3 stories.
Well, I told you a lot of stories. So I'm not sure which 3 stories that would be.
To me, they are the only 3 stories.
Okay.
I think the first one that was the most powerful for me was your story about, I think you were little and you were watching ants.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Can you tell that story?
Yeah. That is a powerful story. In the Depression years, I was born in 1932, and my parents, my dad got a different job, and I think it was in Hetchy project, and my mom was a waitress, and it was a tough time, and so my folks had me live with my grandmother in Nevada, in White Pine County, and we lived on the biggest open picked copper mine in the world, Kimberly. And I had wonderful grandparents. Didn't speak English, and I learned to speak Croatian. And my grandmother let me go out in the desert all the time. And there was one thing I just loved to do. And that was to look at these ant piles made of little teeny rocks. And I spent hours. I was 6 at the time. I spent hours just watching ants. And you know what? They never gave up. They could move rocks and sticks, and they would move around and try to figure out, if this didn't work, then that might work. And I learned so much from their courage, from their persistence. And when I looked at those ant piles, they were high, and they were made out of little small rocks. And I envisioned how many trips those ants had to take to gradually build up these mounds of pyramids with their holes inside. I learned so much from watching those ants, and I'm convinced that it impacted me. You don't give up. You try a different way. Mainly, you never give up. And nothing's too heavy or too big to be moved. You've got to do the right thing, though, in using that knowledge. Well, I love that story.
I'm so glad you told that one, because I always think when you run up against something, especially if it has to do with the valley, and you come home and it's really frustrating to you and you don't see a solution, you don't give up. And I think about those ants. I also remember one part of the story you told me when I was just a kid. You said that one ant had a long piece of grass that didn't fit in the hole, and just never gave up until finally he turned it just enough so it would go through.
That's right, he did. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the other one, there's two more, but the other one I really remember had to do with you as very young again. And it had to do with you, it had to do with a special rock, and I can't remember the details.
Yes, that's a little, I'll tell the story.
Yeah.
It was the same period of time. I would go out in the desert, and it was pretty flat. A lot of sagebrush, except for the sagebrush. One day I was walking out in the desert, and not too far away appeared a rock that I hadn't seen before. And I looked at the rock in that Nevada landscape, and I was drawn to it. And I found myself walking towards this large rock, boulder actually, yellow-orange boulder. And I got closer and closer to it, and at some moment, I merged with the rock. This may sound strange. I can't think of any other English word, but I became connected. I became one with that rock. And time changed a little bit. And I don't know how to explain that either. All I know is that I did merge with that rock. I made a connection that somehow was very important in terms of my spirit. I was 6, but it was a very strong impact. And I feel Spirit Rock, I feel rocks, there are rocks in the valley, other places that I just love to go to. I feel a connection with rocks. I wish there was English words for whatever that experience was, and I wish I could remember that moment when time altered. But all I can say is that I merged with that.
And the third one I was thinking of was a story you told me, again, when you were a little older, I think, and I think you were protecting your brother, and clobbered.
Right.
The bully.
The bully. Okay. Well, this doesn't have to do with the environment. But yeah, this was a good story. My dad came from a large family, brothers. Uncle Mike, the oldest, used to ride the rails and tell stories about riding the rails during the Depression. He was also a boxer and trained with Max Baer in Nevada, one of the southern towns in Nevada. And my Uncle Nick was also a boxer. One time, they called me Barber Jean, my first name, which I never use. Barber Jean. And Uncle Nick, one day, he said, Barber Jean, he said, there's some not nice people around, children around. He said, do you ever have any trouble with them? And I said, no, not really. I said, but my brother does. My brother's 2 years younger, and he's a crybaby, and he gets picked on a little bit. And he said, well, do you know what to do? I said, I don't know. I said, what do you mean? And my Uncle Nick said, let me show you something. He says, if anybody bothers you, he says, this is what you do. He says, you're going to hit him. And I looked at him, and I said, well, I don't know how to hit. He said, I'm going to show you. So here's what my Uncle Nick showed me. He said, put your fist up like this. And I did. And he was standing in front of me. And he said, now, he says, you're going to turn your hand, and you're going to hit me right in the nose, like that. And he said, but you're not going to really hit me in the nose. You're going to hit my hand. So that's what we did. We practiced. So I put my fist up like this, and I'd go, hit. Come back again. I go, hit again. So I did that several times. I thought this was fun. This was a great game. I'm not going to hit anybody, but this was great fun. So I did that. One day, I was in junior high school. I was coming back. My brother was in primary grade. We were walking, and I was behind him. And these three boys, all our neighbors, were picking on my brother. And they were pushing him up against this fence. And he couldn't get away. And he was crying. And they were poking at him and picking on him. And I went up there and I said to the middle kid, I said, stop picking on my brother. And he said, what are you going to do about it? And I went like this. And I went wham! And I hit him right in the nose. Blood went everywhere. And the two boys that were there, they ran away. And I took my crybaby brother home, and he was never bothered again. But there's a little interesting P.S. to this story.
Oh, yeah?
I was walking down in Fairfax, and I saw this sign on this door. It said, Sam Ridge, attorney in law. And I said, Sam Ridge? That's the boy I hit in the nose. And I walked in, and I said to the secretary, is Mr. Ridge in? And she said, yes, he is. She says, who are you? And I said, well, I think I might know him. I think I might have punched him in the nose when we were kids. And she said, Mr. Ridge, there's a lady who'd like to talk to you. So we talked a moment. He's gone now. And he confirmed, yeah, he was that guy. And so I just thought that was kind of interesting after all those years to meet him. So
You know, I just thought of one other story. Just flashed out. I think you should tell because it has to do with, I think, your really strong sense. You've always told me about this of right and wrong. I was always impressed. It never had to do with like the best decision for everyone, or didn't have to do with the best decision monetarily. It was what was right, what was really right. And what it was is you could just see this was wrong, and it was you tell the story, but it's the story where these parents wanted to photograph a baby, and they put it near the hubcap and it wouldn't sit upright. Could you tell that story?
I'll tell that's a brief story. Yeah, it was Easter, and we were with relatives in Richmond, across the bay. And I was standing out on the porch, open porch, and stepped outside. And there was across the street, there was a car, and a 1940s car, nice looking 40s car. And there was a lady with a little baby sitting on the street, leaning up against the hubcap. And she wanted to take a picture of the baby. And the baby kept falling over, couldn't really sit up. And she began to hit like the baby. She shook it, and the baby's head would hit the hubcap, these big, gorgeous hubcaps in those days. And you could see she was hurting the baby. And I can remember, I was 12 at the time. I came flying off that porch down to the edge of the street, and I yelled at her, "You stop shaking that baby. You're hurting that baby. And you stop that right now." And she did. And she picked up the baby and went back into that house across the street. And yeah, I didn't like bullies. I didn't like people who hurt other people. And that was not right. And I had a real strong sense of that. And it came up there.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
I wanted to get that.
All right.